Senator Paul, let me begin with a threshold question for you. This election was not stolen. Do you accept that fact?
Well, what I would say is that the debate over whether or not there was fraud should occur. We never had any presentation in court where we actually looked at the evidence. Most of the cases were thrown out for lack of standing, which is a procedural way of not actually hearing the question. There were several states in which the law was changed by the Secretary of State and not the state legislature. To me, those are clearly unconstitutional, and I think there's still a chance that those actually do finally work their way up to the Supreme Court.
Senator Paul,
I have a difference, and those things
I have to stop
occur.
you there. No election is perfect, but there were 86 challenges filed by President Trump and his allies in court. All were dismissed. Every state certified the results after investigations, counts, and recounts. The Department of Justice, led by William Barr, said there's no widespread evidence of fraud. Can't you just say the words, this election was not stolen?
What I would suggest is that if we want greater confidence in our elections, and 75% of Republicans agree with me, is that we do need to look at election integrity, and we do need to see if we can restore confidence in the elections.
Well, 75% of Republicans agree with you because they were fed a big lie by President Trump and his supporters who say the election was stolen. Why can't you say,
well, I think where
President Biden won a legitimate and fair election?
Hey, George, where you make a mistake is that people coming from the liberal side like you immediately say everything's a lie instead of saying there are two sides to everything. Historically, what would happen is if I said that I thought there was fraud, you would interview someone else who said there wasn't. But now you insert yourself in the middle and say the absolute fact is that everything I'm saying is a lie.
Well, because, Senator, I said what the president said was a lie because he said, hold on a second. He said the election was stolen. This election was not stolen. The results were certified in every single state after counts and recounts.
You're saying that absolutely you're saying there was no fraud and it's all been investigated. That's just not true.
So it's not what I said, sir. I said the Department of Justice found no evidence. Let me finish my point.
No, you said
something that was not true.
You say we're all liars. You're just simply saying we're all liars. And
I said it was a lie that the election was stolen.
Premise that you're right and we're wrong.
Imagine watching an armed insurrection at the U.S. Capitol for the first time since the British in the War of 1812, all born out of the lie that the election was stolen, and then still repeating that same lie when asked about it on national television. I don't know whether Rand Paul is being deliberately misleading or if he's just that naive, but either way, he's both an embarrassment and a clear and present danger to this country. Now, right off the bat, he leans on this idea that the debate on election fraud should still occur. So either Rand Paul was born yesterday and missed the last 3 months where this debate did occur, or he's being willfully disingenuous. Since the moment the polls closed, the Trump campaign and its allies have brought 65 cases forward all across the country alleging fraud or nefarious behavior, and they lost all but one case, which shortened the cure deadline in Pennsylvania from 9 to 6 days. That's it. The rest of the cases resulted in losses for Trump. So that we're clear, that was the debate. Legal issues in this country are adjudicated in the courts, not on Fox News, not on OAN, not on Newsmax, not by Don Jr. at some rally in Pensacola. They're settled in the courts, and the courts made it abundantly clear on numerous occasions that these cases were baseless. So despite what Rand Paul says, the debate did happen, and Trump and his mouthpieces lost. Paul even goes on to suggest that the cases were thrown out for lack of standing, but what he fails to acknowledge is that plenty of cases were judged on the merits, and Trump lost those cases too. Just because Rand Paul and the right weren't happy with the decisions doesn't mean that they ceased to exist. Take one case in Wisconsin, for example, where Trump argued that the manner in which absentee ballots were received and processed during the pandemic was unconstitutional, a reference, among other things, to drop boxes. The judge, Brett Ludwig, a Trump appointee, didn't dismiss for lack of standing. He actually decided to hear the case and judge on the merits. He held a day-long hearing on the matter, and yet, after actually hearing the case, he not only dismissed it, but did so with prejudice, meaning Trump wouldn't have been allowed to refile. He wrote, quote, "This court has allowed the plaintiff the chance to make his case, and he has lost on the merits." He explained that Wisconsin's election officials had followed state law, and that even though they instituted changes like allowing drop boxes for absentee ballots, the moves were not illegal, and officials used acceptable ways to implement the law. Oh, and by the way, even the judge went on to note that the Trump campaign was well aware of these changes months before they were put in place and should have challenged them then, instead of waiting until Trump lost to suddenly decide they were unconstitutional. Because it was never about the constitutionality of these measures, it was about reverse engineering some excuse, any excuse to push back against the fact that Trump lost. That's why no Republicans brought up any lawsuits in states that Trump did win that also implemented measures for COVID, because it was only about overturning the election and nothing else. Rand Paul even goes on to cite the fact that 75% of Republicans agree with him that election integrity needs to be looked at. But here's the thing, the only reason 75% of Republicans agree is that Republicans like Rand Paul and Donald Trump have been telling them that there are issues. And so of course the party thinks that there's an issue, since that's exactly the information they've been fed. If I walk into an office building on a sunny day and tell everyone it's raining, and then turn around and poll the office for how many people think it's raining, guess what? A lot of people are going to think it's raining. That doesn't mean there's rain, it means that I lied to people and they believed me. That's it. So Rand Paul citing this statistic isn't proof of fraud, it's proof that Republicans have been manipulated and lied to by the people leading their party. But the most absurd part is when Rand Paul says this.
George, where you make a mistake is that people coming from the liberal side like you immediately say everything's a lie instead of saying there are two sides to everything. Historically, what would happen is if I said that I thought there was fraud, you would interview someone else who said there wasn't. But now you insert yourself in the middle and say the absolute fact is that everything I'm saying is a lie.
All this shows is that Rand Paul and the rest of these bad faith actors on the right clearly know how to game the refs. They know that they can hide behind this idea that there are both sides to everything. And so what you're left with, thanks to this BS notion of balance, is that one side says 1 + 1 is 2, and the other side says 1 + 1 is 27. And yet the right has just decided that because they say something, regardless of how glaringly wrong it is, that they're entitled to just as much deference because of this both sidesism. That's not how it works. When one side is lying, which is exactly the case with Trump's claim that he won the election, then that's it. You don't get deference, you don't get the benefit of the doubt, you don't get balance. What you get is called out for being a liar. So I understand that Rand Paul is throwing a temper tantrum because he thinks he's entitled to equity just because he's on the right, but the treatment he's getting is the treatment that he deserves. I should note too that the issue that Rand Paul is whining about not receiving adequate deference on is this idea that there was widespread fraud in the election, and so that we are crystal clear, there was not. Widespread fraud wasn't proven in any of the 65 court cases. Bill Barr and the DOJ admitted there was no widespread fraud. Chris Krebs and the DHS's cybersecurity unit said there was no widespread fraud. Republican governors and secretaries of state said there was no widespread fraud, and the recounts and audits confirmed the prior counts to within a fraction of a percent. If there was widespread fraud, we would have seen evidence, but there is no evidence. All there are allegations that were made by Trump that we knew he was going to make since before the election even took place. He told us before November 3rd that the only way he would lose is if there was fraud. And now we're supposed to believe the guy who warned us in advance that he'd cry fraud because he's crying fraud? So if Rand Paul is feeling attacked, he should, because he's not only continuing to perpetuate a baseless disinformation campaign, but a dangerous one too. We've lost police officers and Trump's own supporters over this egregious lie. And yet the fact that Rand Paul continues to give it oxygen goes to show that there are truly no limits he won't sink to, no number of lives lost, no amount of tearing the country apart, because all he and Republicans care about is their own grip on power. While you're here, please check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. I take a deep dive into the top stories of the week, and I also interview major players in the world of politics, like Kamala Harris, Adam Schiff, Nancy Pelosi, Pete Buttigieg, Katie Porter, Al Franken, Cory Booker, Jamie Harrison, Mary Trump, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.